You're listening to international investment advisor Doug Goldstein on the Goldstein on Gelt show, the financial show where we'll talk about how you can make the most of your money. With all the confusing financial chatter bombarding you each and every day, Goldstein on Gelt will give you the practical information you want and need about living a financially stable life. Here's your host, money maven Doug Goldstein.
Okay, we are back. We are talking with Tony Buzan, who is the world's foremost expert on thinking visually. He lectures all around the world. In fact, he invented a system called MindMapping, but perhaps he's most well known for having twice before been on the Goldstein on Gelt show. Tony, it's a pleasure to have you back.
Nice to be back.
For those of you who might have missed the original interviews, you can download them at goldsteinongelt.com or simply go to YouTube and see the videos of those two interviews with Tony Buzan. Although people could listen to the interviews and find out what mind mapping is, before we get into our discussion today, could you just tell us what is the definition of a mind map?
Yeah, a mind map is the essence of human thinking. It's not verbal. It's primarily visual, multisensory thinking that radiates like supernovas of thought. So a mind map starts with a multi-dimensional, multi-visual, multi-sensory central image that radiates the main branches, the basic ordering ideas of its thinking. So you literally have a supernova of your thought, and that is natural. That's the way we think.
Okay, so that's a little bit poetic. Let's talk practically now. What does that mean?
Thank you for the poetry. My definition of myself as a poet is actually a pleasing definition. Thank you so much.
Technically, what does that mean? If someone wants to mind map an idea, what would that look like?
Well, for example, let's say you want to think about Israel, and you want to write an essay about it or develop a thesis on it. Rather than doing a linear series of notes, you start with an image. So you have, for example, a map of Israel or the flag or a symbol. And then for that nation, you'll have the main branches. So one branch would be environment. One branch would be the people and the different forms of people. Another major branch would be culture. And you'd have the art and the poetry and the theater, everything to do with thinking and cultural ideas. You have another branch on the actual history of the main people, the main leaders within Israel. You would have a main branch of political context internationally. So what you have in front of you, in front of your eyes, literally in front of your brain, is the explosive structure of the ideas about which you wish to think. So it could be about Israel. You could similarly do a mind map on a novel that you're going to study. You could do another mind map that examines yourself, another mind map on any thought you have. So thinking is not linear and not verbal, not list-like. It is visual, multisensory, and associated in this radiant network of ideas. That is the mind map, and that is the way we think.
Okay, so that's the model. In fact, now I understand why you use the term supernova, because it's like an explosion of ideas.
Yeah, thank you. And poetry is actually one of the great ideas for the human brain. And poetry is based on metaphor. And metaphor is simply taking two images and blending them, and that's what causes poetry. So, for example, someone writing a poem about a fist will call the fist of iron. So we'll take fist and iron, and that's a metaphor. So metaphors are images connected into poetic thoughts. And happily, a mind map is a giant poetic thinking structure.
So when I first read your books, it must be decades ago, not that I'm trying to age you, but when I first read the books and I was learning about mind mapping then, it was the fact is, although the way you're describing it as a supernova, everything was on a piece of paper, so it was in fact flat. It wasn't one-dimensional and linear, but it was two-dimensional. And is there a way now? I know that you do a lot of work online and with computers. Is there more of a three-dimensional modeling that you've developed into the system?
Yes, the MindMap software is now verging into 3 dimensions, so you can actually construct on your computer a mind map, and you just revolve it, and you see your thinking now in 3 dimensions. And you can, of course, do this in your own head. Don't think only in 2 dimensions. Think of any structure. I mean, back to the mind map on Israel. You know, the branch of culture can emanate towards you and radiate the sub-branches of poetry, writing, art, theater, art, etc. So in your own mind, you can revolve your own thoughts into 3 dimensions. We are trained in standard school to think almost unidimensional, and then we do lined notes in 2-dimensional, but now we need to train ourselves to rotate our thinking into 3-dimensional. You could almost think of mind maps as like the big bang of the universe of thinking.
Absolutely. We are talking with Tony Buzan, who is perhaps the world's foremost expert on thinking visually. He speaks a lot about not only developing mind mapping, which is a system that he developed, he's also spoken on this very show about speed reading, about improving your memory. If you missed any of those previous lectures, be sure to check them out at goldsteinongelt.com, or simply go to YouTube and look up Goldstein on Gelt, and you can hear the previous interviews with Tony. Tony, I'd like to focus a little more on something you said. As you know, this show is really a personal finance show. People often ask me, why do I bring on someone who's a memory expert or a mind expert? And I think the answer is because we're trying to find ways of helping clients and investors make decisions. How can someone use mind mapping to make a practical decision about whether to buy a stock, how to set up a retirement plan, what sort of portfolio he wants to have?
Yes, brilliant financial thinkers think visually. They don't think verbally and list-like. So when you are trying to organize your thinking about investment, for example, if you just put in a list of ideas, your thinking is going to cut yourself off from your own thinking. So literally you are snipping away thought from thought from thought. Now what you need with your intuition and your ability to make interconnectivity, you've got to have the visualization of the interconnectivity of all the ideas that are going to give you a high probability of making a decision to make money in that area. Now, the mind map allows you to do that. In fact, Johnson in insurance, in Fidelity Insurance, he actually mind mapped all his thoughts on a day, and then having done his own mind map, he would bring in 10, 20 advisors and say, I'll give you a minute each. And every one of those experts gave him 2 or 3 or 4 key ideas. He added those to the mind map, so he had this wonderful map of all the experts' thoughts and his best ideas, and then he looked at the overall picture, and big themes suddenly clarified themselves, and then he said, of course, that's what I'm going to invest in. And he made 80% accuracy in making his decisions based on mind mapping.
Okay, so now let's bring that down a little bit closer to home. Let's talk about a couple that's sitting down to discuss their budget, and they want to figure out whether they should be spending more money here or more money there, or less money if they don't have enough income to cover all of the expenses that they'd like to cover. How could they apply this to make a better decision?
Well, one particular individual who started his own company actually did a mind map on all the different themes within his new company. And he looked at the mind map, and he suddenly realized that when he was using color in the mind map, color stimulated the environments in which he was building his own business. And he suddenly discovered color coding in his office that enticed so many customers that he had 50% more customers coming because of the colors that he had transferred from his mind map into the building.
No kidding. Amazing.
Yeah, and he said, the mind map stimulated me from all multi-sensory dimensions and made him money on that. Another restaurant which was going bankrupt in a downturn session, this owner just mind mapped the whole definition of death by debt. And the main branches from this restaurant were food and service, etc., etc. And he displayed this mind map in front of all the employees, many of whom were very poor. And one of them was the lowest wage earner as a waiter. Mm-hmm. And this waiter, everybody losing money, suddenly said to the mind map, look, why don't I stand in front of the restaurant, have a mind map of the restaurant, and everybody who walks by, I will call them in and come and see this fabulous restaurant. And sure enough, the one brilliant idea, sparked by the mind map was for one individual, the lowest wage person of the entire group, to welcome everybody on the street to come in the restaurant. And again, 75% per day more customers.
Wow.
One idea realized and made active as a child of this mind map. So the mind map is like the giant universe of clouds, where suns are born. And the mind map is like a universal cloud where the stars are born, the births of the ideas are born within the context of the mind map. The mind map stimulates the images and the associations and therefore the creativity, and that helps you generate more, not only ideas, more income.
Okay, we have been talking with Tony Buzan. You've been talking to us about using mind maps, not only how they can help you to think of things more clearly, but also how they can help you to actually make some decisions. Tony, in the last couple of seconds, could you just tell people how could they learn more?
They can learn more simply by studying their own brain. You must learn how your brain fundamentally operates, and it operates with images, with senses, with associations, and with sparking the generation of these ideas. And the main gymnasium for your brain is the use of a mind map. The mind map is like a multiple gymnasium for all aspects of thinking.
You've written many, many books. If someone was just getting started, which of your books do you think would be the best one for him to read?
Use Your Head. It's a manual for how to operate the piece of machinery you've got, i.e. the brain. And the Use Your Head book teaches you the operations manual, how to use your head to use your brain.
I guess they should give that out to every student in school. Tony Buzan, thank you very much for joining us again.
Doug, that was wonderful. Thanks for using your head.
Take care.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.